Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point. And we're back with another episode of the Magical Salon. I'm Amanda, your observer this week, and I'm joined by
James, and I will be your voyager.
Voyager. So today we're diving into the void. We're going to be talking about what it is and ultimately whether there's a certain appeal there from a psychological and spiritual level. So what's the void? Can you tell me, Voyager?
Yeah, I think we're going into the magico-mystical realm today. Because what is the void? I don't know. Is it nothingness or is it potential? Because you kind of hear all things come out of the void, but in my head, I perceive it to be nothing. But it's also not nothing. It's like the absence of anything. I don't know. It's very hard to wrap your head around and conceptualize what even like we're referring to when you hear the phrase void. And I guess additionally, why do a lot of mystical traditions describe emptiness as the source? Before all things, there's the Big Bang, or everything came from source or some magical other place, but it's so beyond our realm of conception that it's, I guess you just call it void because you don't know what else to attribute it to. I don't know.
It's interesting because when I was looking this up, I can't remember what the guy's name was. He was some like Western philosopher sort of figure. It started with a T, like Tillman or something like that. But anyway, he was basically saying, how is it possible that God can be considered the highest being while also being the source of all being? Like, how could that be possible? And sort of how does that factor into these conversations? Because in some ways it's like the chicken and the egg. There is nothingness, but then something arises out of the nothingness. So in some ways is the nothingness not the holy part, because it's like the grounds for everything else to be created.
I like the idea of the chicken and the egg because it kind of is a paradox in some ways. I'm not sure if chicken and egg is a paradox per se, but the idea and the concept of the void is paradoxical because, as you're mentioning, something is both the creator and source of everything, but then you can't point to that thing. You don't remember, because a lot of times people will say, oh, when I die, I'll just return to the void. I don't remember being alive before. I won't remember after. So it's playing with the idea of it being beyond this material realm, kind of, I guess, which is interesting because in the chakra kind of hierarchy, the void chakra is like associated with the crown chakra, which is the very tip of your head, the top of your head, where allegedly you're connected to source or spirit or God or the higher power, your holy guardian angel, whatever, is all coming from, I guess, this other realm, the void, where it's this invisible place where your consciousness maybe rests before you come to physical matter. So before you do something, you have to consciously decide to do it in your head, but that's not happening out here in the real world. It's happening in your mind. So then the mind of God, they could think of everything and then it manifests maybe.
Well, two things that it made me think of. The first is that so the void, another way to think about the void would be a vacuum sort of. And in physics, a vacuum is sometimes called energy at rest, and it is ripe with potential. I remember learning in physics, which I was horrible at physics. Like, I barely made it past physics without my dad's assistance. I was so bad at it. I just remember, I can't remember what they called it. It wasn't inertia or potential. It was like something else kind of like that, a similar phrase. Maybe it was like latent potential, or I don't know. It was just like an interesting idea that kind of energy at rest is an interesting way of thinking about the void.
I think it is called potential energy, which is, yeah. So if you think of a roller coaster, at the very top of the roller coaster, before you've started the descent, you've reached the apex, the ascent, and you're at rest at the top before you kind of get let go and then plummet. And then, oh, I'm going 60 miles an hour really quickly. But you have a lot of potential energy. It's there, it's resting, but it just hasn't dropped yet, kind of. So it's, if you think of polarity, I guess, those little like knocking balls that you see in movies on desks where you drop a little pebble, it smacks it, hits the other, and they keep clacking back and forth. At a certain point, it's stopped at the top when it's swinging, and then it swings back, and then it hits, and then it stops. Between movement, there's a slight pause, and that's kind of the void between doing and non-doing, I guess. There's a slight gap.
So it's interesting because you mentioned the chicken and the egg as being a paradox, but another paradox that came to mind for me is the Schrodinger's cat paradox.
What is the Schrodinger's cat paradox then?
I'm trying to remember how I was going to tie it into the
My
void.
physics guru.
Oh, because you asked, like, is the void nothing or is it everything? Which is sort of the principle of Schrodinger's cat, I guess, in a way. So it's a box and there's a cat in it, but you don't know until you open the box whether the cat's alive or dead. But both are true at the same time until you open it to see. And that's the similar principle here, I feel like.
I like that you mentioned that, though, because you called yourself the observer at the start. That's a tie-in, though, because the idea with Schrodinger's cat is that it's not real until there's an observer. So to your point, I don't know, it could be dead or alive. So for all intents and purposes, it's both until I open the box, and then I know definitively it is such. It is dead or alive at that point once I witness it. Until it is witnessed. But then, okay, so then what if the tree falling in the forest then? Does that mean it's not falling?
I was thinking of that too. That's why I feel like Schrodinger's cat, like the paradox, always was kind of confusing to me because I didn't see how both things could be true. And it kind of reminds me of that documentary we watched on Netflix about infinity, where it was saying something to the effect of, what was it? Like you put an apple in a box and it could become any object or anything over the course of infinity. And I didn't see how that could be possibly true either, although I'm not a science person.
Well, yeah, I'm sure I'm butchering it as well, but the idea was something to the effect of it's just atoms and that's the building block of life, for lack of a better word. So essentially they'll decompose the apple in this magical cube that will exist for infinity. So then all the atoms in that cube will just keep rearranging into all these different shapes over time. So it'll be a cat eventually, it'll be a dog, it'll be a parrot, it'll be whatever, a yo-yo. It can be anything because the essential blocks are there. They're just not vibrating at the right frequency at that moment in time.
Okay, so that's interesting because it raises another question, which is the divine energy, which you could also perceive as being the void, either that or it's what creates the divine energy? Is the void what creates the divine energy? Then the divine energy is what creates everything else? Or are they one and the same? And I ask that to also ask, is the divine energy conscious? Because if you think about it in another way, in a purely science-based way, as you said, the atoms are always moving. They're never really at rest. So it seems like it would only be a matter of time over the course of tons and tons of years and the atoms moving around. Eventually conscious life would be created.
I think it is conscious. I think matter, whatever, the fabric, I almost think, okay, so to take a step back, I think the void almost could be viewed as the matrix or something. But if we apply it to the religious example, the Tao in my mind is almost synonymous with the void. So when you hear the void, it's the Tao. From it, all things are created. The 10,000 things spawn from the void. That's also the Tao. You disagree?
No, well, kind of, because I was looking up the void and it was saying that in Taoism, Wuji is nothingness. And Wuji is like a formless state. But if there's another name for it, then it can't be the Tao. So it seems like Wuji exists and then the Tao comes out of that. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of my question.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, is I think the Tao is the fabric. Again, you can't use words to describe the void. It's nothing. So it's a futile effort, but that's kind of the fun of it at the same time. But the Tao is this pervading, underlying presence, essence, thing, consciousness of the universe, matter, the thread through everything. But could you also just at that point say it's the void? Because that's where all things come from, and then they all return to the void at the end of the day, which is kind of in line with reincarnating, and you ripple out of the water, the sea of life. You're a little wave, and then you fall back down, and then you go under the water, and then you come back up again in 3 aeons, and then you go back down again. So it's the Tao or the void you're kind of returning to, maybe. Because yeah, I mean, Taoism also stresses the idea of usefulness comes from emptiness. That's very present, and we talked about that in our Taoism episode. A room is useful because of the emptiness. It's not a solid room. It's useless. And a window, you need it. The value of the window is it being open, or a vase. It can hold water because it's empty. So there's a lot of use to emptiness, even though we view that as a waste of space. Typically, it's not optimized, but in Taoism, that's good. And you also, again, in an earlier episode, we talked about the wheel of life, or spokes on the wheel. The void, you could almost say, is stepping off the wheel. If there's a merry-go-round or a carousel or a Ferris wheel, maybe, you're just spinning on this wheel. But the void or the Tao isn't being fixed in your seat on the wheel. You're just kind of observing it from afar. You can see the whole wheel instead of just one point of view.
Do all cultures believe that emptiness is useless? I mean, you basically said they don't, in terms of like that one example that you provided. Why don't I say that? Because it goes back to perspective, like glass half empty, glass half full, sort of a similar rationality. Because you're talking about optimizing, but not everybody believes in like optimizing space either. Like that seems like a very sort of capitalistic inclination. But, you know, it kind of makes me think of, in terms of the void for Ash Wednesday, which is relevant because we're in Lent now, when I would go and they would put the cross on with the ashes and they would say, remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. I always liked that.
It's like acknowledging the void, right?
It is, but I also think some people find it depressing. But for me, it's more about balance and fitting in on a long, interconnected scope, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people think of the void and it instills sort of a deep-seated fear in them. I think ultimately because it represents uncertainty, and so it provokes, well, it's uncertainty and unknowability, which provokes feelings of fear and distrust in people. But another way of looking at it is, like, think about when you go to sleep and you just have peace and this feeling of rest in the darkness. That could also be the void, how that feels, instead of it being like existential dread.
I do think it's a good point of it being considered in a frightening way, because I think it's hard to talk about because it is scary. It's kind of akin to mortality, which is depressing. Nobody wants to think about dying. But something that I also was thinking about relating to void, I believe the Stoics, that were a group of philosophers from, I don't know, ancient Rome or something, maybe Greek. I can't remember. They had this idea of the void as well, but they were able to use it in a somewhat liberating fashion to say, sort of like reincarnation. If I'm going to be coming back and going back to the void from where I came from anyways, then you're kind of already infinite then. So then you can have more agency in the now, knowing that you can't really mess up that bad, because you are dust, you're going back to dust. So nothing can really be that serious at the end of the day in some ways. One other religious example, I had a couple because I just thought it was interesting to hear the different perspectives. So we touched on Taoism. Christianity has it, from, to your point of Ash Wednesday, the dust to dust is a great reference to the void. But there's also this idea of, I think it's called theosis, which is it's the idea of becoming like God or God-like, which is impossible, obviously, because you can't become God because you're finite. You can't become infinite and uncreated, I guess. I just think the idea of theosis, becoming godlike, is almost talking about stepping into the void. You can't go to the other side of the void, perhaps. You can touch the void, but you can't understand it because you are not God ultimately, which would be the entire void. Maybe you can step a foot into the void or the abyss. You can tap it, but you can't understand it. Maybe so you can experience it. You might not be able to explain it because words won't be able to, and you can't be it because it's beyond your ability, but you can experience it. Maybe
kind of goes back to people's refusal to let any element of mystery lie. They must explain everything, even if they will never be able to explaining. They'll never actually be able to explain it. I don't know. Sometimes I just wonder if we should just stop trying so hard to explain everything.
So this is the last episode of the Magical Salon.
No, but I guess what I'm saying though is it's such a human inclination to even want to try and explain what the void even is. Animals don't try to do that. They're just living. They're truly wu-weiing, being present, embodying the principles, whereas humans are often very caught up in metaphor and abstraction, which takes you out of the present and in some ways takes you further away. Overthinking, doesn't that just take you further away from where you're trying to get in the first place?
Yeah, but I think the idea of the void, again, you have to experience it. You can't really think about it. So if you're thinking about it, yeah, you're going at it the wrong way. You have to...
But how do you experience it?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, there's a million ways if you look it up that people have, but one of the obvious ways that is most popular is meditating. People argue you can still the mind to create a vacuum, an empty blank slate in your mind. And again, think about it. Your mind, for all intents and purposes, is outside of time and space. In your mind, I could imagine in my head or do a guided meditation where I'm walking on a beach or looking at turtles or the aurora borealis. In my mind, I'm imagining it. I don't have to go anywhere outside, do anything, interact with anyone, which is playing with the idea of the void, which is outside of time and space. You can't point to it physically. I can't show you what I'm thinking about, but I am experiencing it internally.
Well, but couldn't you say that there is a physical component to the void, i.e. space, which is a void? It keeps going in infinity and we can't actually track that. So does it not also have a physical component?
It's a good question, because I always kind of conceptualize space as void-like. When you think of outer space specifically, just the vast, infinite expanse of nothing with a pale blue dot, to be Carl Sagan. It's kind of daunting, though.
That was a pretty good impression.
Yeah, I know. I'm good at impressions. I just thought that was interesting. From the other example is obviously nirvana, that concept in Buddhism, because Buddhism is about, the actual definition is it's about extinction, or it's a state of liberation or illumination that's characterized by the merging of the individual or transitory ego with Brahman. But isn't that, again, going back, it's like the idea of getting out of the wheel, or you're returning to a bigger thing than your little pinhole view of the universe. You're going back to everything, which is the void from our perspective. It's so overwhelming, maybe, that it is almost nothing to us because it's so incomprehensible.
There's also the call of the void. Are you familiar with that? Technically, it's a French phrase. So in French, it's l'appel du vide, the call of the void. And it refers to a psychological phenomenon in which you get sort of this fleeting urge or these intrusive thoughts to do something dangerous or self-destructive. So typically it's something you experience in a situation that could be dangerous. So you're on the top of a building and you think to yourself, oh, I could jump off right now. Or you're driving down the road on the highway and you are thinking, I could just swerve and hit this car coming in the opposite direction from me. This is an actual psychological phenomenon that I don't know that everybody experiences it, but it is not associated with suicidal ideation, because I was looking up that. More so, I think people attribute it to to your brain like misfiring safety signals. And it doesn't mean you're like actually going to do it. That's kind of the nature of an intrusive thought.
Well, isn't that then just ultimately, it's kind of just your recognition in a fleeting moment of your mortality where you realize, whoa, I think I'm really permanent and solid here. But if that guy wasn't paying attention, or if I wasn't paying attention and didn't turn 3 seconds early, I would have literally died or gotten creamed by this car and might have died. So it's, or I'm on top of this building. I have no intention of jumping off, but even if I slipped, I could die like that. And it kind of is a, oh shoot, you think I'm very far from the void. It's over there. I don't have to think about it. But at the same time, it's very close because life is fleeting. One day you're gonna be gone. Maybe you won't have a bunch of lead up and knowledge of, oh, I'm getting sick or I'm getting elderly. Like, no, you could just have your lights turned off, for lack of a better word, with no recognition, which is interesting because in Gravity's Rainbow, that's kind of the idea, which is a book by Thomas Pynchon. One of the ideas is that at the time in World War II, we had faster than sound rockets. So he was playing with the idea of what would it be like to get hit with a missile. So you would literally be dead before you could even hear it. That's how fast it's going. But again, that's a man-created thing now. That never used to happen. You would have to see the bear that runs up and kills you or see the guy that stabs you or whatever. But now it's like, no, you can just have something fall out of the sky and you're done and you never even heard it.
Well, it kind of reminds me in that short story that I mentioned in a prior episode, Extinction List of Surviving Animals. I also was thinking about this concept. So if you imagine Ready Player One, a world in which everybody is hyper plugged in to technology, in some ways real living happens online or virtually because the physical circumstances are so crappy that it forces you in some ways. But a situation like that would be similar in that you could be bombed or something while you're virtually experiencing something and never see what actually happened to, or experience what happened to your physical body, which is just kind of a crazy thought. Because anything else, I mean, even if you die in your sleep, are you cognizant of what's happening? No, maybe not, but you're not as disconnected from your physical body as you would be in that circumstance or in the Gravity Rainbow circumstance.
I was more thinking of it in terms of the call of the void, to your point, where I agree. I don't view it as like a suicidal thing. It's a human right when you glimpse your own mortality almost that you can experience when, and I mean, that's happened to me. Even when we've gone on random hikes, sometimes you slip or whatever. And it's like, we're not rock climbing or mountain climbing or anything, but it's like, oh, there's like a pretty steep ledge there. I don't know. You read these stories where somebody choked on a pen or whatever. And it's like, I chew on pens all the time. Anything can happen that can return you to the void really quickly, I guess.
But see, I associate that as a different phenomenon than the call of the void. That is essentially, I mean, a very minor near-death experience or something in which you're truly glimpsing your mortality. Whereas the call of the void, why I think it's interesting, is because in some ways it's calling to you, it's speaking to you, it's provoking that intrusive thought that you otherwise would not have had. Whereas, I mean, everybody's had a time when they were driving and blasting their tunes and then something terrifying happens and then you like turn the music off and you white knuckle your steering wheel because you're like, oh my God, I've got to take this seriously. Like, I'm driving a death trap and I didn't really fully, intellectualize that when I first got in the car. I just feel like that's just a different experience of the void in relationship to the call of the void when it's speaking to you.
So what is it? The void is calling to you. What's calling to you then? I'm genuinely asking because I get it, but what is it? What is beckoning you to jump off the ledge? What is that?
I mean, I don't know.
Is it an entity, a god, a place? Or are you just curious? Like, what would happen? What would it be like to not be in my body?
I feel like it's probably a combination of all of those things. Haven't you experienced that? For me, it happens a lot when I'm driving and I just think to myself, wow, like I could just turn the wheel and be dead basically. But it's not that I want to do that. I'm not gonna want to do that. It's almost like I realized that I could do it.
So if that's the call of the void, I guess, again, what is the void? What is calling to you?
Eternal rest.
That's interesting. Eternal rest. Because sometimes I think to myself, it would be nice to just be able to hit the pause button on life. I don't really want to go on vacation or anything. I just want to like press pause for a couple days and just mentally decompress and reset, not do anything, literally just press pause and then just come back mentally refreshed.
Well, and I did write down this quote by Nietzsche. You'll know this quote because a lot of people are familiar with this. If you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. That was written in 1886.
So question then, is the abyss the same thing as the void then?
I would say yes. I think in the context of what he was writing about, he's more so saying that if you're spending a lot of intellectual time thinking about evil things, will you not take some of that on yourself? And another way of looking at it would be kind of like you find what you're looking for in some ways. It's an interesting thought. So when the call of the void is happening and you feel like you're being communicated with, is it true that it is also regarding you? Maybe it's a mutual recognition, but we can't obviously know what the void may be recognizing. I mean, that's obviously humanizing it, but it's an interesting thought.
I view it more as a magical phenomenon where the void, the abyss, let's say you don't fully know what it is, which I think we've established. There's a lot of ambiguity. Nobody can explain it because it's beyond human conception. So words are going to be inadequate. But as a byproduct of that, you get into a situation where you kind of don't, as a concept, the void, the abyss, don't you just kind of think of nothingness, blackness? I don't know, but that's hard to envision.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like because I think there was a point when I was turning away from Catholicism and I was just like, there's nothing. There's just the void, which sometimes I was okay with. But then if I really thought about it, it was like the most terrifying thing ever. Because intellectually you can be okay with it. But if you were like right about to die and you were like, there's nothing after this, it's hard to accept and understand because you can't understand it.
Well, I think really what it gets to is loneliness, right? That's partly why it's so scary. Because if you realize there is nothing after and there is no higher power, then that is isolating and lonely.
Yeah. And I think ultimately you get caught up in your ego, which you've identified with throughout this whole lifetime. And for many people, that's all they see themselves as. So that's their whole everything's tied up in their ego. And if you can't take away from that, then you don't see anything after this. So that's also why I feel like a spiritual component is important.
So this is kind of going a little bit off course, but I did mention earlier that the void is associated with the crown chakra, the top of your head. Well, interestingly, when you're born as a newborn, the top of your head is not fully fused together. There's a soft spot at the top of your head. Isn't that interesting though? Because it's almost a lot of this stuff, the chakras, whatever, that's not real. It's not real medicine. It's not science. It's not anatomy. You can't point to a chakra. It's supposed to be a subtle energy field. You can't point to it. It's not a nerve bundle. But your head literally isn't even formed. So doesn't that kind of imply then that you are connected to source or something?
So according to the internet, babies have soft spots to allow their brain to grow rapidly and to make the skull flexible enough to pass through the birth canal during delivery. So I guess that makes sense. But you could also say that, babies are basically egoless when they're first born. They have no personality, not until they get a little bit older. It's just consciousness, basically.
It's pure unmolded consciousness. Exactly. It's almost like you've come from the void, right? You're just now a conscious energy in a literal child, an infant body. You've just been shot out into the world. But think about it. It's like, what the heck? I was an infinite nothing. I was in the void, the ether just floating around. And now I'm stuck here and I can't communicate with all these people and there's lights and I don't know what's happening.
And you came from the darkness.
I do think it's interesting. I will just say that. But do you think it's a scary phenomenon then, the void? Because I think it is portrayed in a frightening manner as something to be afraid of potentially.
Well, yeah. And I think that existentialism, nihilism, and fatalism are all tied up with the concept of the void. If you don't have a spiritual concept or connection, that's how you typically, if you're purely based on like human rationality, you're going to probably fall more towards nihilism, existentialism, and fatalism. And if you're just thinking about it intellectually, it is terrifying. But that's why it's weird, because it's like you're not, in my mind, from a spiritual perspective, if there's a divine spark in you and you die, your divine spark rejoins all the other, like the other divine energy. But that's not really the void in my mind. You're not returning to the void, not exactly. You're returning to divine energy, which is in the void maybe, but I feel like that's a difference. But I will say, because I was talking to my dad about it, about this concept of you returning to the divine energy, and he didn't really vibe with that because of the ego, essentially. He was like, I mean, what about talking to my loved ones, like after, when I'm not alive anymore, kind of thing. So I think that's also why it's difficult to wrap your head around these concepts, because when you would actually be encountering it, you would be an egoless person, which is pretty much impossible to really wrap your head around. Do you have anything else to say about that?
I would say a slightly different take on the void, which I still think is interesting, is if you take an H.P. Lovecraft cosmic horror approach, where essentially he would make all of these famous sci-fi horror stories, and he envisioned these mystical, magical, interdimensional, beyond human comprehension demons or entities that exist in the universe. And it was just always funny to me because the stories would be frightening, but they never showed the monster really. And it's a story, and he wrote short stories, I think, exclusively. And they would just be funny because the big reveal would ultimately be the character was stricken with horrors of unspeakable origin. And then it kind of ends like the guy just loses his mind because he saw the void. Basically, the monster was so beyond our comprehension, so beyond words, that the character instantly goes mad, loses it. It's just a funny take where in his conception, seeing the void just instantly makes you lose your mind almost.
Well, and I've seen that in other things, seeing the face of God or seeing the face of something, and it's kind of, you don't describe it, or they don't describe it because it's so incomprehensible. It's supposed to represent that as well.
All right. Would you like to hit us with a weekly wisdom before we wrap up?
I sure would. Man would sooner have the void for his purpose than be void of purpose.
Who said that?
That's Nietzsche as well.
That's Nietzsche?
He loved the void.
Say it again.
Man would sooner have the void for his purpose than be void of purpose.
What does that even mean?
Kind of feel like it's a commentary on these people who are like super existentialists. I would rather be an existentialist and that's my purpose than me not having any purpose at all. Although it kind of also means you have no purpose at all, because that's kind of what existentialism is.
Yeah, it's like my purpose is nothing, so therefore I have a purpose. But it's like, but your purpose is nothing. It's kind of funny though, because again, with the paradox idea, it's, what are you doing? I'm doing nothing. And it's like, well, you can't do nothing. Aren't you doing something by doing nothing? That's more of a language trick, which again, language is an invisible thing that's shaping how you view the world all the time without you realizing it. Well, listeners, tune in again to the void. What do you think about the void? Give them a send off.
I like it. I love it. I want some more of it.
Give them a send off into the void as they voyage into the unknown. But they'll be back next week for another great episode.
Exactly.
Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, rate, comment.
Only 5 stars.
Share, 5 stars only. That's true.